Remove that door or pay the fines, and trust me, they'll stack faster than you can count. Patricia's voice carried across the clubhouse steps, dripping with smug authority as she jabbed her manicured finger at the reinforced frame of my front door. My pregnant wife leaned against the wall, pale from the stress, one hand on her stomach as Patricia stepped closer, too close. Then, in a flash of entitlement, Patricia shoved her against the HOA wall like she was nothing more than an obstacle in her way. I caught Emily before she stumbled, my hand on her shoulder steadying her. Patricia smirked, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to yell. Instead, I leaned in and said quietly enough for her to hear, "You're not even authorized to issue half these fines." And deep down, you know it. That made her blink. The shift was small but real, like I'd just pulled the rug from under her. She tried to cover it with another sneer, but the damage was done, because she didn't know what else I knew. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I straightened, introduced myself in the calm tone that had disarmed men twice her size overseas. Name's Daniel Mercer, former Marine. Now I make a living, finding weaknesses people hope no one sees. I was trained to read threats and shut them down. And Patricia, I see you clearer than you think. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. The kind that makes the room lean in. That door behind her wasn't just steel and bolts. My father carved its frame before he died. He built it with his own hands when this house was nothing but studs and sawdust. Reinforcing it wasn't about aesthetics. It was about carrying forward a promise that this home would always be a safe place for my family. And now, with Emily carrying our first child, safety wasn't optional. It was everything. Patricia didn't care. She saw control slipping away and thought intimidation would fix it. That's why she shoved my wife. That's why her little empire of fear had lasted this long. Because most people here backed down. But I couldn't. Not with Emily gasping behind me. Not with my father's door gleaming under the morning sun like a silent vow. "You think you can bully your way through this?" I asked, my voice steady. "You've just picked the wrong family to test." Neighbors were gathering now. Phones were out. Patricia's face flushed when she noticed the cameras, but she still doubled down, spitting threats about liens and collections. She didn't realize she'd already crossed a line she couldn't step back from, and she definitely didn't realize I'd been watching her longer than she thought. My heart hammered, but not from fear, from calculation. I'd lived through worse than her tantrums. I'd been in firefights where hesitation cost lives, and I learned then what I knew. Now, you don't fight every battle with fists. Sometimes you win with patience, precision, and timing. And right now, I was collecting every slip she made, because eventually, I'd drag it all into the light. Emily squeezed my hand, whispering that we should just go inside, but I shook my head gently. "Not yet," I told her. "Everyone here needs to see who Patricia really is." I could smell the sharp tang of fresh paint from the clubhouse wall behind me, hear the buzz of insects in the hedges, and feel the weight of 30 pairs of eyes watching. Every sense sharpened as I locked the moment in my memory. Patricia's arrogance had turned physical, and that gave me more than outrage. It gave me leverage. This wasn't about one door. It wasn't even about one shove. It was about the pattern of fear she used to run this neighborhood, and how that pattern ended the second she laid hands on my wife. Where are you watching from? Because, trust me, the HOA thought they'd cornered another quiet neighbor. They've got no idea they just walked into a fight they'll never forget. The crowd didn't leave after Patricia stormed off, muttering about fines and lawsuits. They lingered, buzzing like bees around a hive that had just been rattled. I could feel their eyes darting between my reinforced door and Emily still leaning against me. She was shaken, but standing tall, her hand protectively resting over the curve of her stomach. I guided her inside, closing the door behind us. Though I knew the real battle wasn't outside, it was spreading through the neighborhood right now. I set Emily down on the couch, poured her some water, and sat across from her. The living room felt tense, heavy with the weight of what just happened. Through the front window, I caught sight of neighbors clustering in twos and threes, whispering. They weren't whispering about us. They were whispering about Patricia. Minutes later, a soft knock came at the door. It wasn't hostile, not the kind of knock Patricia used when she wanted to intimidate. This one was hesitant. I opened it to find Marlene, who lived across the street, clutching a folder to her chest like a lifeline. Behind her, 2 other residents lingered, looking uneasy but determined. "She's been doing it to all of us," Marlene said before I could ask. She handed me the folder. Inside were copies of violation notices. Different families, same story. Outrageous fines for mailboxes an inch too tall, for flowers not approved by the landscaping committee, for fences that had been standing for years. Patterns jumped off the page, the same threatening language typed out with Patricia's signature scrawled across the bottom. I looked at Emily, who gave me a small nod. She knew exactly what this meant. Patricia wasn't targeting just us. She'd been running her little reign of terror for months, maybe years, and people were finally brave enough to come forward. I sat with the folder on my lap and asked the neighbors to sit down. Their voices overlapped as they poured out stories, threats about liens on their homes, fines doubled without warning, humiliation at meetings when anyone dared question her. None of them had military training or the calm resolve that comes from years of high-pressure operations. They had mortgages, jobs, kids, lives that couldn't absorb the stress of fighting her. That was the power Patricia counted on: fear and silence. But once she shoved Emily, that silence cracked. I flipped through the folder again, noting similarities. Same violation codes repeated, same missing signatures from the rest of the board. My consultant's mind was already cataloging the inconsistencies. I didn't need classified intel or complex systems. This was basic procedure, and Patricia wasn't following it. "Tell me," I asked, "when she fined you, did she ever hold a board vote?" Marlene shook her head, and the others followed. Not once. Patricia had been acting alone, writing fines as if she were the HOA itself. That wasn't just arrogance. It was a violation of state HOA statutes. Every fine she'd issued without proper board approval was potentially invalid. The room grew quieter as that sank in. For the first time, I saw something flicker in their eyes. Not fear, not resignation. Hope. Emily reached for my hand, her voice steady though her body trembled. "You can stop her, can't you?" I squeezed her fingers. "I won't just stop her. I'll make sure no one ever gets shoved against that wall again." The sound of the refrigerator humming filled the silence as everyone absorbed that promise. I wasn't making it just to Emily. I was making it to all of them. This wasn't going to be one man standing up for his family. It was going to be a community taking back control. Where are you watching from? Because in neighborhoods like ours, bullies survive on fear. But the moment that fear breaks, everything changes. Patricia thought she had control, but tonight, in my living room, her grip started to loosen. By the next evening, word of Patricia's shove had spread through Willow Creek Estates like a brush fire. Cars slowed as they passed our house. Neighbors gave us subtle nods, and the air felt charged with something new: resistance. But I knew rumors weren't enough. If Patricia had ruled unchecked this long, it was because she had people on the board who either supported her or stayed quiet. And silence was her strongest weapon. That's why I went to the clubhouse that night. It wasn't an official meeting, just one of those informal gatherings where board members pretended to mingle with residents while watching everyone like hawks. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, bouncing off polished tile floors, and the smell of burnt coffee lingered from the break room. Patricia was there, of course, surrounded by her usual orbit of enablers. She flashed me that condescending smile that said she still thought she held all the cards. But my eyes weren't on her. They were on Greg Whitmore, the treasurer. Greg stood near the refreshment table, holding a styrofoam cup like it might shatter in his hand. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who should have looked confident. Instead, his shoulders hunched inward, his jaw tightened and relaxed, as if he couldn't decide whether to speak or swallow the words back down. His eyes darted between Patricia and the residents, never settling too long. I moved closer, deliberately slow, giving him the chance to walk away if he wanted. He didn't. When I reached him, he offered a faint nod, but his grip on the cup tightened until the rim bent. "She's good at putting on a show, isn't she?" I said quietly, watching Patricia laugh too loudly across the room. Greg shifted, his shoes squeaking against the tile. He didn't answer right away, but the silence said more than words could. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, and when he finally spoke, it was low, almost inaudible. "You should be careful. She..." She doesn't forgive challenges. His hand trembled slightly, coffee sloshing inside the cup. That small betrayal of nerves told me everything. He knew what she was doing was wrong, but he was trapped between conscience and fear. I leaned a little closer, lowering my voice. You're treasurer, aren't you? You've seen how she operates. You know she doesn't run votes before issuing fines. Greg's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. Instead, his eyes flicked toward Patricia, then back to me. His lips pressed together in a thin line, like the truth was pressing against his teeth, begging to come out. But fear held it back. I didn't push harder, not yet. Pressure would only make him retreat further. Instead, I gave him an out. You don't have to say anything tonight. Just know this. What happened to my wife isn't staying buried, and when the time comes, I'll need people who've seen what's really going on. Greg's gaze dropped to the floor. His free hand clenched into a fist at his side, knuckles white. The conflict was etched into every line of his body, guilt warring with self-preservation. Across the room, Patricia raised her voice, announcing new compliance checks for the coming week. The room stiffened, some residents shifting uncomfortably, but no one challenged her. That silence again, thick and suffocating. Except for Greg. I saw his shoulders flinch with every word she spoke, his chest rising with shallow breaths. He wanted to break that silence, but the fear of fallout held him like a chain. I stepped back, giving him space. His eyes lifted for a brief second and met mine. That was enough. A silent acknowledgement. He might not be ready now, but the struggle inside him was real. And when the dam broke, Patricia wouldn't be able to contain it. Where are you watching from? Because right here, in the harsh glow of the clubhouse lights, I saw the first crack in Patricia's armor. It wasn't in the residents she bullied. It was in the man standing next to me, his body betraying the truth he wasn't yet ready to speak. And when he finally chose a side, I knew everything would shift. Greg's eyes haunted me as I left the clubhouse that night, the slight tremor in his hands, the way his shoulders flinched every time Patricia barked out another decree. He hadn't said the words, but his silence screamed louder than any confession. I knew then that the cracks inside the board were widening. All it would take was the right push. But Patricia wasn't slowing down. By morning, she'd doubled down. A bright orange notice was slapped onto our reinforced front door, the adhesive so strong it tore the finish when I pulled it off. The paper threatened a $500 fine for unauthorized structural modification, and an additional $50 for each day it remained. 10 days, she'd said earlier, and now the countdown had officially begun. I stared at the notice, jaw tight, the cheap ink smearing on my fingers. Inside, Emily shifted uncomfortably on the couch, one hand pressed against her belly. The stress was wearing on her, and Patricia knew it. That's what made this so cruel. I stepped outside for air, and the neighborhood was alive with whispers again. Marlene waved me over, her face pale. She's sending more out today. The Millers got one for their driveway paint, and the Harrisons. She's threatening to fine them over a playset their kids have had for years. The air smelled faintly of cut grass, but it was soured by tension. Doors cracked open, blinds twitched. Neighbors passed each other papers like contraband. Patricia's campaign of intimidation wasn't isolated anymore. It was escalating, spreading through every street like a sickness. I tucked the orange notice under my arm and walked down the street. Every few houses, I spotted another one taped up. Fences, shrubs, patio furniture. It was systematic, a purge of control designed to remind us who she thought we belonged to. Halfway down the block, I saw Patricia herself, clipboard in hand, striding confidently up a driveway. She didn't even look at the family inside, who stood frozen at their window as she slapped a notice on their mailbox and scribbled something on her papers. The sheer arrogance made my stomach churn. I approached her calmly, each step measured. "You're wasting a lot of paper, Patricia." She whirled, lips curling into that familiar sneer. "Daniel Mercer, already up early to defend the indefensible. Your door is an eyesore, non-compliant." "Dangerous, even dangerous?" I repeated, arching a brow. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, but she kept her chin high. "Steel frames don't belong in a neighborhood like this. They lower property values. My job is to protect the community." I let a slow breath out, forcing myself to keep my voice steady. Your job is to enforce the bylaws with board approval. Funny thing, though, I don't see the rest of the board walking around with you." Her smirk faltered, but only slightly. She adjusted the clipboard in her hands like a shield. Neighbors were peeking out again, their eyes wide, watching from porches and windows. Patricia thrived on their silence, but now they were seeing her unchecked power for what it was. Every fine, every notice, issued without a vote. And that detail wasn't just a quibble. It was the foundation of my strategy. Patricia leaned close, her perfume sharp and cloying. "You think anyone will stand with you?" "They're too afraid." Behind her, I caught a glimpse of Greg exiting the clubhouse with a stack of papers. His eyes landed on me, then shifted nervously toward Patricia. His steps slowed, and he fumbled the stack against his chest, as though reconsidering whether to approach. That hesitation was all I needed. He was breaking, inch by inch. I turned back to Patricia, lowering my voice just enough for only her to hear. "Fear doesn't last forever. You made a mistake the second you touched my wife. And when this ends, it won't be you protecting the community. It'll be the community protecting itself from you." Her nostrils flared, but she didn't answer. Instead, she scribbled another note and slapped it onto the nearest mailbox. Her hands moved faster than before, almost frantic, as if to reassert control. "Where are you watching from?" Because right here, under the summer sun of Willow Creek Estates, Patricia had escalated her war. But she didn't realize every notice she slapped up only added more weight to the evidence I was building against her. And soon, that weight was going to crush her. The notices Patricia plastered across Willow Creek Estates clung like neon scars to every house. Each one was another threat, another reminder of her grip. But instead of intimidating me, they sharpened my focus. Fear was her weapon. Procedure was going to be mine. I spent that evening in my home office, the soft glow of the desk lamp spilling across a spread of HOA documents I'd pulled from the state's public records database. The keyboard clicked steadily as I navigated through archive filings and digital meeting minutes. My training had taught me to scan for inconsistencies, to notice patterns others overlooked. It was no different now, except instead of spotting weaknesses in enemy defenses, I was dissecting the bylaws that governed Patricia's power. One detail leapt out at me: elections. According to the bylaws, all homeowners were required to receive written notice at least 10 days before a board election, with proof of quorum recorded in the minutes. But the last election, the one Patricia claimed had secured her another term, had no posted notice on record. Not a single mailing confirmation, no attendance roll, no signatures confirming quorum. On paper, that election never legally happened. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding in. Steady rhythm. Patricia wasn't just abusing her authority. She didn't have authority in the first place. Emily appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her robe, her voice soft. "You've been at this for hours. Did you find something?" I swiveled the monitor toward her. She never filed the election properly. Legally, she may not even be president. Her hand tightened on the fabric of her robe. For the first time in days, I saw a spark in her tired eyes. "So, everything she's done. All these fines." "Invalid," I said firmly. "Every single one." The weight of those words pressed into the room. For Emily, it was relief, but for me, it was something sharper, a plan solidifying. Evidence wasn't just evidence. It was leverage. The next morning, I decided to test what I'd found. I walked to the community library, a modest brick building at the edge of Willow Creek, where the HOA kept archived minutes in physical form for resident review. The librarian, a silver-haired woman named June, recognized me instantly. She lowered her voice as she handed me the binder. "You're not the first to ask about those records lately." I raised an eyebrow. "Who else?" Her gaze flicked toward the window, where Greg was visible across the street, pacing near his car with his phone pressed to his ear. His body language screamed conflict, shoulders hunched, one hand raking through his hair. He was fighting himself as much as he was fighting Patricia. I flipped through the binder, page after page of formal minutes, most neat and signed by multiple board members. But when I reached the section for the last election, the pages were conspicuously thin. One sheet, unsigned, with nothing but Patricia's name scrawled across it. No witness signatures, no mailing confirmations. A sham. The sound of my fingers brushing the paper seemed louder than it should have. This wasn't just neglect, it was deliberate. Patricia had skipped every safeguard, crowning herself without procedure, and no one had stopped her. Emily's words echoed in my mind. So, everything she's done. Invalid. I slid the binder back across the counter and thanked June. Outside, the late afternoon air carried the scent of jasmine from nearby hedges, but it couldn't soften the tension thrumming through me. Greg still stood by his car, his hand now gripping the roof as he stared at the ground. When his eyes lifted and caught mine, he froze, then quickly looked away. His silence told me he knew. Maybe he'd known all along. Patricia's power had always looked unshakable, but the truth was plain in black and white. She'd built it on sand. And now, with every residence notice in my hand, with every missing page from that binder, the ground beneath her was starting to crumble. The discovery wasn't loud or dramatic. It didn't need to be. Because once you've uncovered the fault line, you don't shout about it. You wait, and you press until the entire structure caves in. The knowledge that Patricia's presidency was built on a sham burned steady in my chest. But it wasn't something I could unleash yet. Timing mattered. Evidence had to be more than undeniable. It had to be positioned so the entire community saw it at once. Until then, every move she made only deepened the pit she was digging for herself. But the waiting carried its own weight, and Emily bore the brunt of it. That week, she woke in the middle of the night, clutching her side, her breathing shallow. I rushed her to urgent care, the sterile white corridors buzzing under fluorescent lights as monitors beeped in nearby rooms. The doctor leaned against the counter, flipping through charts, his voice low but firm. Stress can do this. Elevated blood pressure, muscle strain. It's not uncommon in pregnancy, but it's dangerous. Whatever's causing it, reduce it. Immediately, Emily gripped my hand, her knuckles pale, eyes glassy with exhaustion. She won't stop, Daniel. She won't leave us alone. Her words cut deeper than anything Patricia had ever said. Because Patricia's war wasn't just against me. It was against Emily, against the life growing inside her, against the very promise that door represented. I promised Emily I'd handle it. Not someday, not eventually. Now. When we returned home, the night air was heavy with humidity, and the reinforced door loomed in front of me like my father's voice in wood and steel. Protect what matters. I laid my palm against it, steadying myself before pulling out my phone. The images I'd captured of Patricia plastering notices, the binder entries June had let me review, the testimonies Marlene had handed me. It was all there, waiting. But one piece was still missing, someone from the inside willing to confirm it. The next evening, I found myself standing in the dim light of Greg's backyard. The grass was damp from sprinklers, and the cicadas screamed from the trees. Greg stood by the shed, his arms folded tightly, his shoulders hunched as though bracing against a storm. "You've seen it," I said, keeping my voice even. "You know she hasn't run a legitimate vote in years." His jaw worked, but his eyes avoided mine. "If I say anything, she'll bury me. She'll ruin me. Patricia doesn't play fair. Greg, she doesn't play legal," I countered. "And you know it. You've been signing off on financials, but those fines, they're hers alone. You've seen the gaps in the minutes, the missing records. You've seen enough to know she's not president in anything but name." He rubbed his temple, the styrofoam cup I'd seen him clutch before, now replaced with a crushed can of soda. His body screamed conflict, the shifting feet, the shallow breaths, the way his voice cracked when he finally muttered, "You think the rest of the board doesn't know? They're scared too. No one wants to be the first nail sticking up." I took a step closer, lowering my tone. "You don't have to stand alone. I'm not asking you to burn yourself for nothing. I'm asking you to protect this neighborhood the way it should have been protected from the start. You saw what she did to my wife. You saw how far she's willing to go. That's not governance. It's abuse." The words hung between us, heavy as the damp air. For a long moment, he just stared at the shed wall, fists flexing and unflexing at his sides. His silence was loud, but it was shifting. Not denial anymore, fear giving way to conscience. When I finally left, he hadn't agreed. But his eyes had followed me all the way to the street, the soda can crushed flat in his hand like a decision waiting to be made. That night, as Emily slept fitfully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, every sense on high alert. Patricia thought escalation would break me, but all it had done was show me exactly how much I stood to lose if I hesitated. The discovery wasn't just in the missing minutes or unsigned sheets. It was in the human cost. Patricia's unchecked power was harming my wife, my child, and every family she bled dry with her bogus fines. And that meant hesitation was over. I wasn't just building a case anymore. I was preparing to end hers. I didn't sleep much after that night. Emily's breathing stayed shallow beside me, and every creak of the house reminded me of what was at stake. By sunrise, I was already outside, the cool morning air damp against my skin, running scenarios through my head like a soldier prepping for deployment. Evidence I had, motive I had, but without someone on the inside, Patricia could still claim authority and twist it in her favor. Late that afternoon, I drove to the coffee shop on the edge of Willow Creek, a small brick place where residents often met outside the HOA's gaze. I picked a corner table, ordered nothing but water, and waited. The bell above the door chimed, and Greg walked in. He looked like a man carrying invisible chains, tie loosened, shirt wrinkled, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on me. He slid into the chair opposite, keeping his voice low. "You shouldn't have pushed me last night." "I didn't push," I answered evenly. "I reminded you what's at risk." His hands trembled as he cupped them around the mug he ordered. Steam rose between us, but his eyes stayed fixed on the dark liquid as though searching for courage at the bottom. "She's not supposed to be president," he said finally, the words cracking like ice under weight. The admission hung in the air. My jaw tightened, but I let him continue. "She never sent notices for the election 2 years ago," he said. "We didn't have quorum," I told her. I showed her the bylaws, pointed to the section about written notice, but she waved it off, said no one cared as long as she kept the place clean. His shoulders sagged, the shame bleeding through. "She told me to sign the minutes anyway." And I did. The confession was heavier than I expected, but it was exactly what I needed. Patricia hadn't just skipped procedure, she'd coerced silence, and Greg had carried that guilt every day since. He rubbed his forehead, voice rough. "I wanted to quit, Daniel. I drafted a resignation letter twice, but she threatened to smear me, said she'd claim I'd mishandled funds if I left. She's been using me to make her rule look legitimate." I leaned forward, my tone sharper now. "Then let's end it. You're treasurer. Your word carries weight. If you confirm she acted without authority, the entire structure falls apart." His eyes flicked up, finally meeting mine. Fear warred with relief in them. "You don't understand. She'll drag my name through the mud. She'll ruin my family." I thought of Emily, of the way her hand clutched her belly in the urgent care bed, of the doctor's warning. My voice lowered, steady but edged with steel. "She already tried to ruin mine, and she almost hurt my child. How much longer are you willing to let her weaponize fear?" Greg's breathing quickened, his fingers tapping against the mug. He looked toward the window, where the sun was sliding behind rooftops, shadows stretching long across the pavement. When he turned back, his voice was quiet but resolute. "I'll give you what you need. Emails, minutes, everything. But if this backfires, she'll come after me harder than anyone. You won't be alone," I promised. "Once the truth is out, she won't have the power to touch you." For the first time, his posture shifted, still tense, but straighter. He exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. "I'll meet you tomorrow night. I'll bring the files." We left separately, careful not to draw attention. Outside, the air smelled faintly of roasted beans and exhaust from passing cars. But all I could taste was the edge of victory beginning to form. Greg had cracked. And with his confession, Patricia's empire wasn't just wobbling. It was one signature away from collapse. When I drove home, Emily was waiting on the porch, her robe pulled tight against the cool breeze. She searched my face for an answer. I gave her a single nod. For the first time in weeks, she smiled, not fully, not yet, but enough to remind me what I was fighting for. Patricia thought fear would silence everyone, but now the silence was breaking. And once the first truth was spoken, more would follow. Emily's faint smile stayed with me as I stepped inside that night, but my mind was already running through the steps ahead. Greg's confession wasn't just a crack in Patricia's foundation, it was the opening I needed to bring the entire structure down. Now came the part I'd trained for, planning, preparing, and executing with precision. The next morning, I left early, the neighborhood still quiet, dew clinging to lawns. Instead of heading to work, I drove to the county library. The private study rooms were tucked away in the back, lined with dusty shelves and muffled by thick glass. It was exactly the kind of quiet place I needed to put strategy into motion. I spread everything across the long oak table, the photos of Patricia plastering violation notices, Marlene's folder of fines, the archived minutes I'd reviewed, and my laptop open to state HOA statutes. Greg's words replayed in my mind. She never sent notices. We didn't have quorum. She told me to sign anyway. That single admission meant every action Patricia had taken as president was legally null, but to dismantle her grip, I needed more than knowledge. I needed proof arranged so clearly that even her staunchest defenders couldn't twist it. Step one was creating a timeline. I mapped out each violation Patricia issued, matching dates against meeting minutes. Entire months showed fines with no recorded votes. Step two, connect the missing election procedures. The bylaws required certified notices, a quorum, and board signatures. I checked every line of the record. Nothing. Just her lone scrawl, sometimes not even dated. Step three, document the consequences. Families threatened with liens, fines stacking day after day, stress-induced medical issues, including Emily's urgent care visit. The more I compiled, the clearer the picture became. This wasn't leadership. It was fraud. I paused, rubbing my temples. The quiet hum of the air vent filled the room, but underneath it I could hear echoes of my training. Hours spent dissecting intel, preparing reports that decided whether men lived or died. The skill set was the same, even if the battlefield was different. Precision, clarity, control, that was how you won. By mid-afternoon, I had assembled a binder thick with cross-referenced evidence. The opening section highlighted Patricia's illegitimate election, supported by the bylaws themselves. The next sections showed her unilateral actions, illegal fines, false threats, harassment, and finally, testimonies. I left space for Greg's files, the missing piece that would transform this from a resident's complaint into an undeniable case. As I packed the binder, my phone buzzed. It was Greg. His voice cracked through the speaker, heavy with tension. "I'm in. I'll bring the emails tomorrow. She's been ordering me to doctor the financial reports too, funneling money into accounts the board never approved. I kept copies." The air in the study room seemed to shift. Patricia's abuses weren't just procedural, they were financial. That meant exposure wouldn't only remove her, it could invite real legal consequences. "You've done the right thing," I told him. "But once this comes out, there's no going back." "I know," he said. His silence stretched before he added, "It's time." When the call ended, I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. For weeks, Patricia had wielded fear like a weapon. Now, her own treasurer was ready to hand me the ammunition to end her reign. I left the library with the binder pressed under my arm, the weight of it grounding me. Outside, the sun had dipped low, shadows stretching across the pavement. Cars moved slowly through the lot, and I caught glimpses of families inside, kids arguing, parents laughing. Ordinary lives. That's what Patricia had threatened, piece by piece, with her false authority. Back home, Emily met me at the door. I set the binder on the kitchen table, flipping it open for her to see. "This isn't just about us anymore," I said quietly. "It's about everyone she's hurt." And Greg's ready to step up. Tomorrow, we lock this down. She traced her hand over the binder's cover, her expression both weary and hopeful. "Then tomorrow's the start of the end." I pulled her close, feeling her heartbeat steady against mine. For the first time, I believed it too. Patricia had pushed us to the brink, but she'd underestimated the resolve of a man who refused to let fear rule his family, or his community. And now, with proof in hand and an ally stepping out of the shadows, her time was running out. The binder sat on the kitchen table overnight, its presence filling the house like a silent sentinel. I barely slept, my mind replaying every step I'd taken, every move Patricia had made, and every risk that still stood ahead. By morning, I knew preparation time was over. It was time to put the plan into motion. Greg arrived just after sunrise. He didn't knock at the front door. Instead, he came through the side gate into the backyard, carrying a weathered briefcase that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. His posture was tense, his shoulders stiff, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I brought everything," he said, setting the case on the patio table. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the clasps, but once it clicked open, his movements grew calmer, more deliberate. Inside were stacks of printouts, emails, spreadsheets, and scanned receipts. I pulled on gloves before handling the papers, not out of paranoia, but habit. Years of documenting sensitive evidence had taught me discipline. I laid the pages out in neat rows, each one confirming what Greg had confessed. Patricia hadn't just ignored bylaws. She'd manipulated financial reports, directed funds without approval, and pressured Greg to sign off on doctored statements. "She used the HOA account like her own bank," Greg said, voice heavy. "Trips, dinners, even renovations on her house. She told me to classify them as community outreach." His eyes dropped to the table. "I didn't stop her. I signed because I was scared." "You're stopping her now," I said firmly. "That matters." We worked for hours in the backyard, the morning sun shifting overhead as the evidence fell into order. Birds chirped from the fence line, their calls oddly sharp against the rustle of paper. Every page we cataloged tightened the noose around Patricia's false presidency. By noon, we had built a second binder, thicker than the first, dedicated solely to financial misconduct. Together, the two binders painted a picture no board, no court, no news outlet could ignore. But strategy wasn't only about evidence, it was about presentation. Patricia thrived on spectacle, on intimidating through dominance. To counter her, I needed to flip the stage. "We'll call a special meeting," I told Greg. "By the bylaws, any resident can petition for one if enough signatures are collected. We'll make sure it's open, public, and documented. When she shows up, she won't know she's walking into her own undoing." Greg swallowed hard, nodding. "She'll fight. She won't give up her seat without a war. She already started one," I replied. "We're just finishing it." That afternoon, I canvassed the neighborhood. Clipboard in hand, I knocked on doors, explained the petition, and showed residents only what they needed to see, the undeniable irregularities in her election and the fines. One by one, signatures filled the page. Marlene signed first, her hand firm and unshaking. Then the Millers, the Harrisons, and eventually even residents I'd never spoken to before. Patricia had built her power on fear, but fear collapses when people see they're not alone. By sunset, I had more than enough names. I gathered the petition, sealed copies of the binders, and walked to the community center. The hall smelled faintly of polish and dust, its bulletin boards cluttered with outdated flyers. I pinned the petition announcement right in the center, bold enough for everyone to see. "Special meeting, Willow Creek Estates Board, mandatory attendance." As I stepped back, I felt the weight of the moment settle in. For weeks, Patricia had dictated terms from her throne of intimidation. Now, the residents would dictate theirs. Greg stood beside me, his face pale but resolute. "She'll come after me when she sees this." "She'll try," I said, "but this time, she won't be standing alone. Neither will you." We left the community center as the streetlights flickered on, their glow casting long shadows across the sidewalks. The binders sat heavy in my hands, but the heaviness felt different now. Not like a burden, like a weapon forged and ready. Patricia thought she could rule without rules. In 3 days, she would face the one thing she'd never been able to control, the truth, spoken out loud, in front of everyone she had silenced. The petition notice had barely been on the bulletin board for 12 hours before Patricia struck back. By morning, bright yellow flyers were stapled to mailboxes and taped to lampposts, her words scrawled in bold: "Fake petition, illegal gathering, ignore." She called me out by name, accusing me of inciting chaos, spreading lies, even threatening legal consequences for agitators. The move didn't surprise me. Patricia's strength had always been speed, attack before anyone had time to think. But this time, she wasn't the only one with the advantage. The petition was valid, signatures verified, and copies already filed at the clerk's office. No matter how many flyers she printed, the meeting would happen. Still, the escalation meant preparation had to be airtight. That evening, I drove to the county clerk's office to file the supporting documentation. The building loomed in quiet authority, its marble floor echoing with each step I took. Behind the counter, a clerk in a navy jacket adjusted her glasses as I slid the petition, the binders, and Greg's signed statement across the desk. "This is for a special HOA meeting?" she asked, flipping through the pages. "Yes," I said evenly, "and it needs to be recorded formally. Copies filed, time stamped, the works. We want no room for dispute." She stamped each page with a satisfying thunk, the ink spreading crisp and final. The sound was like a drumbeat, each thud marking another nail in Patricia's self-made coffin. When she slid the receipt back to me, I tucked it carefully into the binder. The official seal meant there was no going back now. Outside, I called Greg. His voice was tight, the weight of his choice pressing harder now that the meeting was real. "She cornered me today," he admitted. "Asked why I looked nervous. Said she'd review my financials personally if I didn't relax. She knows something's coming. Let her look," I told him. "By the time she realizes what we've built, it'll be too late." That night, I staged everything on the dining table at home. The binders lay open, tabs marked in red for quick reference. Procedural violations first, financial misconduct second, community testimonies last. I rehearsed the order. Establish her lack of authority, prove her unilateral actions, then close with the money trail. Clean, precise, undeniable. Emily sat nearby, folding baby clothes into neat stacks. She glanced at the papers, then at me. "You're ready?" she said softly. I met her gaze, the tension in my chest easing slightly. "I have to be." The night before the meeting, Willow Creek buzzed with anticipation. Neighbors stopped me on evening walks, asking what to expect, whispering their own stories of Patricia's threats. Even those who had stayed silent were stirring now. Fear was giving way to something stronger, anger wrapped in hope. On the day itself, the clubhouse became the stage. Rows of metal chairs filled the main hall, the air thick with murmurs. The smell of coffee and floor polish mingled under the fluorescent lights. Patricia stood at the front, clipboard clutched like a shield, her eyes flashing with the kind of energy I'd seen in combat, the frantic determination of someone who knows they're losing ground. Greg arrived just before it began, briefcase in hand, his jaw set. He gave me a small nod. Not fear this time, resolve. The board members filed in, some stiff, some avoiding eye contact. Residents packed every chair, with more lining the walls. Phones came out, cameras quietly aimed at the front. Patricia noticed, and for the first time since this war began, she hesitated. I stepped forward, binder in hand. The hush that fell across the room was absolute. Every eye turned to me. "This meeting is called under the bylaws of Willow Creek Estates," I began, voice steady. "By petition of the homeowners, with verified signatures and official filing at the clerk's office. Tonight, we will address the actions of Patricia Langford and whether she has held authority legally or abused it entirely." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Patricia's smirk faltered, her knuckles white around her clipboard. I set the binder on the podium, its weight echoing like a gavel. Behind me, the residents leaned forward, waiting. Ahead of me, Patricia braced herself. The final stage was set. The silence after I placed the binder on the podium was a living thing. You could feel it pressing against the walls, humming through the air vents, weighing down on every person in that clubhouse. Patricia shifted, her heels clicking against the tile as she stepped forward, that trademark smirk plastered on her face like armor. "This is nothing more than theatrics," she snapped, her voice louder than necessary, trying to reclaim the room. "I am the duly elected president of this HOA. This circus has no legal standing." I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened the binder to the first tab, sliding a copy of the bylaws across the podium so the front row could see. Duly elected? According to Section 4.3 of our bylaws, board elections require written notice sent to every homeowner no less than 10 days prior, with quorum verified and signatures recorded. Show us where those notices are, Patricia. Show us those signatures." The room buzzed. Neighbors leaned forward, murmuring to one another. Patricia's eyes darted toward the board members flanking her, but none spoke. They knew as well as I did those notices didn't exist. Her face tightened. Everyone knew when the election was. The notices were non-existent, I cut in, flipping to the next tab. Not one mailing confirmation, not one attendance roll, and not one quorum record. The county archives are clear. Legally, the election never happened. You have no standing as president. Every fine, every threat, every lien you issued since then. Void. Gasps filled the hall, louder this time. People pulled out their phones, snapping photos of the documents I held up. Patricia's knuckles whitened around her clipboard. I let the silence linger before flipping to the next tab, this one marked in red. And it gets worse. Greg, our treasurer, has provided evidence that you ordered him to falsify financial records. Community funds used for personal expenses, dinners, trips, renovations to your own home, classified under outreach when the money never reached the community at all. All heads turned to Greg. He stood stiffly, briefcase at his side, sweat visible on his brow, but his voice steady when he spoke. It's true. I signed reports under pressure. I should have spoken sooner, but she threatened to accuse me of embezzlement if I didn't comply. I have the emails. They're in my possession, copies filed with the county clerk yesterday. A collective gasp rippled through the residence, followed by an eruption of murmurs. Patricia spun on him, fury breaking through her mask. Liar! You're covering your own incompetence, trying to save yourself. Greg's hands trembled, but he didn't back down. No, I'm finally saving this community. The room erupted, neighbors shouting over one another, demands for her resignation, cries of, "We've had enough." The air was electric, decades of pent-up frustration igniting all at once. Patricia slammed her clipboard on the table, trying to regain control, but it was useless. "Order!" she barked, but the word had no weight anymore. The authority she'd wielded like a weapon was gone, stripped bare by the very rules she ignored. I raised my voice over the noise, not shouting, but steady, carrying. This is the moment. We either allow her to continue ruling by intimidation, or we enforce the bylaws she's violated. The petition has been filed. The evidence is documented. Tonight, this board decides whether Patricia Langford remains in power or whether the community reclaims it. The crowd quieted, every eye fixed forward. The board members shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Fear of exposure etched into their faces. Finally, one of them, a middle-aged woman who had always remained silent, stood. Her voice wavered but carried across the room. I motioned to remove Patricia Langford from her position, effective immediately. The clubhouse erupted again, but this time with cheers, clapping, the sound of chains breaking. Patricia's face went pale, her mouth opening but no words forming. The vote happened then and there, hands raised high across the room. The majority was overwhelming. When the final count was read, Patricia's clipboard slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor like the end of an era. For the first time since this battle began, I saw her without power, just another neighbor, stripped of her crown of fear. The clubhouse thundered with voices of triumph, but mine stayed quiet, steady, already looking to the final step. The board had spoken. Patricia was finished. All that remained now was resolution. The noise in the clubhouse carried all the way into the parking lot. Cheers, clapping, shouts of relief. It was the sound of a community shaking off its chains. Patricia stood frozen at the front of the room, pale and trembling, stripped of the authority she had wielded like a weapon. The clipboard, she'd once clutched so tightly, lay abandoned on the floor, its pages fluttering beneath the hum of the ceiling fans. I didn't stay in the center of the crowd long. My role wasn't to bask in the victory. It was to ensure it held. I gathered the binders, now filled with signatures, statements, and Greg's files, and carried them into the adjoining conference room. The heavy oak door muffled the cheers behind me, replacing them with the quiet creak of hinges and the thump of the binders hitting the long table. Greg followed me in, his briefcase still in hand. He looked like a man who had just crawled out of a war zone, shaken, drained, but alive. He set the case down and exhaled heavily, his shoulders finally straightening. "It's over," he said, more to himself than to me. I turned to him. "No, it's ending. There's a difference." He frowned, but I opened the binder to the financial section, tapping a page marked with his initials. This evidence doesn't just remove her, it exposes her. These records need to go beyond this clubhouse. County officials, insurance carriers, maybe even prosecutors. His eyes widened, but then he nodded slowly. You're right. We can't just cut her out and pretend it didn't happen. She stole from everyone here. They deserve restitution. The conference room window overlooked the symbolic reinforced door of my home down the block, catching the glow of a streetlight. It felt like my father was watching, that old promise carved into wood and steel echoing back at me. Protect what matters. Tonight, I'd honored it. Not with fists, but with precision and patience. When we stepped back into the main hall, the board had already voted to appoint Greg as interim president. The crowd welcomed him with applause, some neighbors patting his back, others shaking his hand. For once, his body language wasn't tight with fear. He stood tall, his voice firm as he promised transparency, accountability, and a future free from intimidation. Emily slipped her hand into mine, her grip warm and steady. Her smile wasn't forced this time. It was real, though her eyes glistened with tears. You did it, she whispered. We did it, I corrected. Every one of us who stood up. The meeting closed with neighbors filing out into the cool night air, their voices carrying across the lawns like the sound of freedom rediscovered. Patricia remained inside, isolated, silent, shrinking into the corner as the last of her supporters peeled away. She wasn't the queen of Willow Creek anymore. She was just a reminder of how easily fear can take root when no one fights back. Back home, I stood once again before the reinforced door. The gouge where Patricia's notice had torn the finish was still there, a scar I decided not to repair. It wasn't a flaw, it was proof that we endured, that we pushed back, that we won. Emily leaned against me, her hand resting on her stomach. Our child would be born into a community free of Patricia's tyranny, one where neighbors finally remembered they had power of their own. As I turned off the porch light, I spoke to the camera in my mind, the way I'd started this journey. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. The door closed behind us, strong and unyielding. The battle was finished, but the lesson would last. Authority only stands when people allow it, and in Willow Creek Estates, we had finally remembered how to stand.